What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gaming History 101, the Retro Video Games Podcast. This is another extra credit episode. I'm going solo tonight. It's just me, Jam, aka Jamalaeus on Twitter. And what I'm going to be doing on this episode is kind of an overview of all the game clubs that both me and Fred did over 2014. I was originally going to put this into a YouTube episode, which I think I mentioned on one of the episodes not too long ago. However, I haven't really had time to kind of collaborate. I did actually film some stuff on YouTube, but I kind of realised there's no point actually ranking these game clubs in order, because I actually kind of genuinely enjoyed all of them. So I thought what I'll do is I'll just go from January all the way up to December, just kind of discuss in brief all of the game clubs that both me and Fred did this year. For anyone out there that hasn't done a game club with us on Gaming History 101, basically what it is, it's where Fred and I play a retro game through in its entirety and basically discuss it exclusively on one podcast. All of the podcasts are available on iTunes at the moment, all of the ones from this year, that is, but you can also listen to every single game club Fred has ever done on gaminghistory101.com. But with that out of the way, let's get started, shall we, all the way from January. Just before I begin, though, let me just explain that all I'm going to do on this episode is basically just discuss briefly my thoughts of each game as it goes along. But without further ado, let's get started. So the first game club that we did was back all the way in January at the end, and that was Guardian Heroes. Even though I personally had been waiting for this game club for quite a while, back in 2013, Fred did announce he was going to do this podcast himself before I became a co-host on the show, and I even prepared myself to do this game. I played it all the way through on Xbox Live Arcade, and when Fred was due to do the episode, he cancelled it due to what he thought was lack of interest in the game club. But through sheer sort of fan rage and disappointment, Fred eventually overturned that, and back in January we decided to do game club, and I was on for it as well. I think Fred played this on the Saturn as well. I played on the Xbox Live Arcade, and what I like about the Xbox Live Arcade version of Guardian Heroes is that you do have the choice to go from the original version of the game. It's an original artwork from the Saturn, or you can kind of have this HD reworked graphics with this kind of like hand-drawn effects. I personally wasn't a big fan of those graphics. I actually preferred playing the game as it looked on the Saturn, on the Xbox, of course. But that's just me. I really enjoyed Guardian Heroes. This was a really, really fun game to play through for a game club. It's incredibly short, but it's one of those games that you can just easily just put on and even play co-op with a friend or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or partner or whatever, and just fly through really quickly. And there's so many multiple routes through this game. It's a 2D kind of fighting in the sort of vein of sort of Streets of Rage, Final Fight, but with weapons. But there's leveling up, there's magic. There probably has been games that have tried to replicate this Guardian Heroes formula, but not as well as Guardian Heroes has done it itself, and we've never seen anything like this game since the Saturn iteration. I know they did do a Guardian Heroes on the Game Boy Advance. I was going to try and track that down this year, but I haven't had a chance, but I've heard that it's not amazingly good anyway. Unlike a lot of games on the Game Club list through this year, this is one of the few games that I was able to complete multiple times through and see quite a few of the endings. There is quite a deep story within Guardian Heroes. It's from Treasure, of course, as well, who are quite well known for their art style and very unique games. I think we featured another of their games later on, which we'll get to, which was Radiant Silvergun on one of the Game Clubs too. But Guardian Heroes is a fantastic game, which I still recommend picking up today. It's available on Xbox Live Marketplace for a very cheap price. I think in the UK it's sort of about around £4.99 still, which is definitely worth picking up before they take it down, which seems to be quite a common thing for games on the marketplace at the moment. But of course, if you do have a lot of money and you do have a Saturn that still works, then it's definitely worth picking up on the Saturn as well. But certainly Fred can speak to that more than I can. Moving on to February, now this is where Fred and I did the Buffy the Vampire Slayer game club on the original Xbox, and this game was probably, I would have put this, if I was to rank the game clubs, as one of my favourites of the year. The game is quite challenging. It is a kind of 3D fighting game. It really is a game only worth playing if you kind of enjoy Buffy the Vampire Slayer, though debatably there is some enjoyment to have if you're not a fan of the series. But obviously, mentioned on the Game Club, it's set in kind of like season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it does have all the things from the show that you would expect. It has, you like long-winded fight scenes, you're staking the enemies with a stake, which is a very enjoyable and satisfactory ending to each fight. The biggest problem with the game, though, is it was very difficult. It did suffer from the kind of the old age. You're halfway through the level, and if you die, you start right back from the beginning. And I think I play this through. I think both me and Fred both play this on normal mode, and I don't even think Fred finished this game, but I certainly did. I managed to get through it, and I reviewed it for the website. In fact, I think this is one of the first games that I reviewed on GamingHistory101.com. I mean, I got to the end of this game, and I enjoyed it so much, and I finished it quite early in preparation for the Game Club as well. It did lead me to play some more of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer games, because why not? So I went on from Buffy the Vampire Slayer on Xbox to playing Buffy the Vampire Slayer Chaos Bleeds on PlayStation 2, and I think I wrote a review for this one on the website as well, and dictated that I did not enjoy this game as much. Although I think this might have been the one that most people played. I know this game wasn't part of the Game Club, but I'll briefly talk about it on this segment as well. Chaos Bleeds was... They had all the right kind of ideas for a sequel. It improved things, it simplified things, and it made things easier, included checkpoints. But it just wasn't, I guess it didn't have that heart of the previous game. Like, the fights just weren't as enjoyable. They're too easy. You could pretty much just down a vampire really quickly and just stake them. They put more monsters in it as well, which is good. It has all the things that come across as a good game, but it just wasn't as fun. The original game as well had all the voice actors except for Sarah Michelle Gellar from the show, and I believe the voice for the Master was a different actor as well. But Chaos Bleeds changed the voice of Alison. Well, Alison Hannigan stepped out, who usually plays Willow, and a different voice actor took her place. And it was just awful. She kind of came across like a horny lesbian, which really just did not fit in with the theme of the game or the character. I guess this is kind of coming from somebody that really enjoys the show, so maybe I'm not helping my credibility with some fans here. But yeah, I do like Buffy the Vampire Slayer to this day. But yeah, that's Chaos Bleeds. And then for some reason, I decided to move on to Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the Game Boy Advance as well. Wrath of the Darkroll King. And I don't think I've reviewed this on the website yet, but maybe I should. I think I've written a review already for it. This is like a 2D game, and basically, all you need to know is that these games just started going way downhill as they progressed. There was a Game Boy Color game as well that was released. I think this is before the Game Boy. Well, this is before most of the other ones, and that was... I started playing that and it's absolutely awful. It was so bad. I'm not even going to talk about it on this one. But the Game Boy Advance one, it was playable, but again, it was one of those kind of Game Boy Advance games that just suffered from that kind of... I guess they're trying to attempt sort of Super Nintendo graphics on the Game Boy Advance, but it just didn't quite work. But the game just was littered with problems, and it's you can complete it, absolutely, but just not as enjoyable. But that's enough about Buffy for now. Let's move on to the March Game Club, which was the infamous Shmup Game Club. This is an annual event on Gaming History 101, where, well, Fred originally, but this time it was Fred and myself and Jason, aka Albahisa, playing through 4 Shmup games, even though I was unable to play one of them. The shmups this year were Gigawing 2 for the Dreamcast, which is one I completely missed out on because I do have a Dreamcast, but Gigawing 2 is one of those holy grails in this country. In fact, it wasn't even released here, and I just was unable to get a copy of it in time for the Game Club. But the other 3 I was able to play, which was Radiant Silvergun, another treasure game. Fred played that on the Saturn, I played on the Xbox Live Arcade. I think Jason played it on the Xbox as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. The other ones were Cinemora, which I played on the Vita, and Power Up, which was a Xbox Live indie game. I didn't think I was the best at shooters, and I still don't think I'm the best spaceship shooter guy, but I do really enjoy the games. They're just like quick pick up and play games that you just rack up a high score and just play over and over again, especially if you only have time for a short game. All the 3 games that I did play, I mean, Cinemora was kind of one of those really kind of artistic looking shooters with just bullets everywhere, bringing like true meaning to the word bullet hell. It had the deepest story as well. I didn't pay too much attention to it, but it was one of those kind of like, there's obviously a bit of depth to what was going on in the environment, but really just looked gorgeous, this game on the Vita. I believe this game is available on everything else as well. This was probably the one I enjoyed the most playing through, and I still play it to this day. But I did really enjoy the next one, which was Powered Up as well. It's Power Up or Powered Up on the Xbox Live Indie Arcade. It's only like £2 or less, so like $1, and it's still available to this day. And it's just a simple game with kind of like an upgrade mechanic. It reminds me a lot of R-Type, except I think you kind of keep your upgrades in this game. You've got multiple weapons to shoot with. I should have also mentioned both of the games, Cinemora and Powered Up, are sort of horizontal scrolling shooters. In fact, the only one that was the one we played that was a vertical one was Radiant Silvergun. But Powered Up was really good, a really great effort as well. Fred reviewed it on the Gaming History 101 website, and just a ton of fun. This is one of the few game clubs I didn't finish. I have an infamous story behind this where I managed to play through the entire game. I did try this multiple times, and just before the week before the show, I did finally get to the last boss, and I was literally just there, and I perished on that little, just like the last little. In fact, no, I did defeat the boss, but I died as I was defeating him. So I kind of defeated him, but I just didn't see the ending. But definitely a game worth picking up. And the final game in the game club, the Shmup game club, we should say, was Radiant Silvergun. I don't have a huge amount to say about Radiant Silvergun because I played it before the game club, but this is a game to play whether you buy it on the Xbox Live Marketplace or replay it on the Saturn. My favourite memory of this podcast in general was how me, Fred and Albahiza had this kind of like top score competition going on, which by some chance I see come out on top a few times. But that was really good, just kind of share that experience with each of them, and that's really what these game clubs are about, is Fred and I kind of sharing our personal experiences, and of course if anyone else wants to join in with the game club, sharing their experiences playing through the games, kind of like a book club, except with video games, of course. So moving on from, that was March for the Shmupcast. We're now heading into April, where we did Super Metroid. So this is where both me and Fred clearly proved that we shouldn't be doing a retro video game podcast, because neither of us have played Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo. Actually, that's a complete lie. I rented Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo quite a while ago when I was younger with my brother, where we used to rent the console at my grandparents', but I only kind of briefly played the beginning bit, and I really can't speak to it as much as I could now when I've played through the entire game on the Wii Virtual Console. So this game club for me was really much, about damn time was probably the quote, really, because I can't believe I really do like the Metroid games. My favourite of the series, I think I've still stated, is Metroid Fusion, which I played on the Game Boy Advance, quite close to launch as well. Super Metroid was originally supposed to come out on the Game Boy Advance as well, but that just never happened. Had that actually happened, I probably would have played through this game a lot sooner. Anyone that probably remembers, I never owned a Super Nintendo when I was younger, because Super Nintendos were just crazy expensive. So I just very, very occasionally, like I mentioned, we just rented the system. So a lot of the SNES games, and in fact this year I think I've mentioned on Gaming History 101, was me kind of catching up with Super Nintendo games. I managed to play through Super Metroid, Super Castlevania, and one of our other game clubs, which I will mention later on in the show. But yeah, there's not really much for me to say about Super Metroid, and because the game is great, it's got great music, it's got great graphics. If you love the Metroid games, you'll absolutely adore Super Metroid, and I certainly did. It was quite interesting to go through it and sort of share, Fred, kind of where we got stuck. I mean, I tried to play this as well without a guide. I think I only had to pick up a guide maybe once, just somewhere I was just completely stuck. The infamous part that I'm mentioning, of course, is when I fell down the pits, and then you had to use the somersault move, which the game, of course, doesn't. Well, the game doesn't teach you anything, which is part of the reason why I think a lot of people love it. And you have to try and work out how to somersault, or like kind of wall jump, to get back up to the top. And I actually had to call Fred to get some help with that, but I got there eventually. And all is right with the world. So that was Super Metroid. Moving on to May, there's probably a lot more to talk about here. Me and Fred did the Yakuza Game Club on PlayStation 2. Now, this is a series, I think a lot of people would be able to speak to this, but they haven't played through it. This is what some people, well, at least I've heard, call this the kind of the Shenmue alternative on the PlayStation 2. Although, after speaking to some people, like Thorngard being an example, he greatly disagrees with that comment, and obviously likes to consider Yakuza its own thing, brought to us from Sega. Of course, I've never played any of the Yakuza games. This is my very first experience playing Yakuza games, one of them, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I do actually I would like to try and get back to the rest of the series at some point. I'm still yet to even find a copy of Yakuza 2. But anyway, moving on. Yakuza is a game I genuinely didn't actually enjoy that much when I started playing it. It was, I guess it's very heavily story-based at the beginning, and I was kind of one, I guess, with a lot of the game clubs, you're just kind of keen just to jump straight into the action. But as you play through it, as you get used to the combat, and as you get used to how the game plays, you do begin to really enjoy this. So for me, Yakuza was very much a gradual grower. And towards the end of the game, I did really enjoy the experience. It is very, very long though, and I think I might have possibly enjoyed this game even more if I wasn't rushing through it in about a month. Well, I think I had to cut this down a little bit. I think I had to do this within sort of 2 weeks of the game club because I left it a little bit late to start it. But I managed to do it for the podcast, and I think both me and Fred gave it justice, at least from a kind of from a newbie standpoint to the series. There's loads of sort of memorable moments in this game as well. For me, the most infamous memories was you're just walking down the kind of the open world hub. We're just walking around the city, and random people would just come up to you and go, "Hey you!" and you just start a random fighting counter because that makes sense. But of course, that's all part of the of what the game's about. Really, the fighting engine's great. It does kind of feel like a kind of 3D fighting game. I mean, some people, I don't want to use this comparison because I'm sure it's wrong. Some people say sort of virtual fighter-like, but there's like multiple enemies on the screen. It is very over the top though, which is what I like about it. Your main character will do some absolutely bizarre moves, and you can use a lot of weapons and everything as well. The game is quite challenging as well, so there are sort of sections and segments where if you don't kind of go in prepared, like with, like, say, body armor or something, you will get quite stuck. And some of the bosses are really tough as well. Moving on though, Yakuza is one of those games a lot of gamers probably pass by because it was released quite close to the end of the PlayStation 2's life cycle, or at least if they didn't pass this one by, they would probably definitely pass by Yakuza 2. Both games did get a HD re-release on the Wii U Virtual Console in Japan. It's a shame we never kind of got to see those over in this country, because I think a lot of people might have appreciated it now, especially because Yakuza 3 and 4, which were released on PlayStation 3, I believe did quite well as well. And of course, there was the recent announcement that I think Yakuza 5, or it might have come across a different title, but that is coming to the PlayStation 4 next year over in the West as well, which is good news. Anyway, that was back in May. Let's now move on to June's Game Club, and this is a good favourite of mine, Dino Crisis 1 and 2. I like Resident Evil, I like Jurassic Park, what could possibly go wrong here? For some reason, I've never really played through Dino Crisis 1 to its completion. I've played through Dino Crisis 2 many times. I'm a huge fan of that game. On the Game Club, I think I mentioned that this is a game I did receive for Christmas, and I played through it multiple times back then and really enjoyed it. Dino Crisis 2 and Dino Crisis 1, unlike the Resident Evil series, are very different from each other. I'm referring to the PlayStation 1 titles. They're the ones I played through, but you can buy... Well, I think both titles are available for the PC, actually, but Dino Crisis 2 is exclusively PlayStation, but you can get the first game on the Dreamcast as well. The first Dino Crisis is very much kind of more Resident Evil based. It was, as we've mentioned, it was kind of like a predecessor to sort of Resident Evil Code Veronica, where it used the 3D engine and all the sprites, or not the sprites, all the sort of environments are 3D rendered, which is kind of why the game, to a lot of people, kind of looks a bit dull and boring as well. But the game is still enjoyable. I don't think it has aged very well. I guess Dino Crisis was kind of experimental to the developers for what they wanted to do later with other games, but there is fun to be had, and there are a few things that Dino Crisis does do different. It does introduce the sort of the option of choice, where you can choose who to kind of side with in the game, and it does lead to multiple endings. It does use multiple different ammos. There's only 3 guns in the game, but there's a heavy emphasis on mixing ammos, creating ammo, creating health items, and of course it has dinosaurs with Resident Evil controls, with the tank controls, those controls that everybody loves. But the game is quite slow as well. The Dino Crisis actually took me longer to complete than Dino Crisis 2. But moving on to Dino Crisis 2 on that note, that game is very much more action-based, and it's very fast. There's loads of dinosaurs on the screen at once, and it's very much you got loads of ammo. There's no restrictions. It's not a survival horror game anymore. You just shoot the crap out of dinosaurs. You rack up points. So in a way, Dino Crisis 2 was almost a predecessor to the ideas that will be implemented into Resident Evil 4, where you kind of gain gold and you use it to upgrade your weapons. Dino Crisis 2 just is more already about upgrade. You kind of increased your weapons capacity. You can buy new weapons and buy like sub weapon items and things. I generally enjoyed Dino Crisis Crisis 2 more because it did what it did well. It was fun as an action game. It was very quick, and it's a game that you kind of would like to go back to and replay again just for a quick go as well. Especially for a game like me who doesn't have a huge amount of time on his hands. I'd probably more favour going back to Dino Crisis 2 than I would do to 1. But if you do have PlayStation Network in America, you can buy both Dino Crisis 1 and Dino Crisis 2, and I believe put both of them on your PlayStation Vita, PSP, or PlayStation 3, but I do recommend these for both portable devices. If you're a fan of the Resident Evil series, then I do recommend both games, absolutely. There is fun to be had on both titles. Next up in July, we come to probably my favourite game club of the year for multiple reasons, and that is the Shadow of Rome game club. This one, me and Fred joined forces with Trees Complete. And I have so many memories playing through Shadow of Rome. This was definitely the longest game club. It took me the longest to complete, probably out of every game club. And that's saying a lot considering what games we did play this year. It was the most fun I had interacting with Fred and Trees with this game as well. There was many Twitter conversations on Shadow of Rome of where we were stuck, where we were up to. And of course, we all posted our completion Twitter photos of how well we did. I was certainly showing off because I managed to finish first out of all of them and do it in the shortest time, which I still don't think was very short at all. It did take us all a very long time. Shadow of Rome, I think, put me through every emotion a game possibly could. There was rage quitting moments, there was joy, there was sadness, and just everything you can imagine. It combines probably the two weirdest things in games, action and stealth. The stealth sections weren't completely awful, but they were probably my least favourite of the game. That's where you play as a different character, and the game just completely slows down. The bits that all of us, I believe, we enjoyed the most was when you played as Agrippa, where I kind of joked about saying he was AKA Chris Redfield, because this was a Capcom game. Shadow of Rome was made by Capcom, and a lot of the characters seem to look more like other infamous Capcom characters, although I did joke that Octavius, who's the stealth guy, looks a lot like Raiden from Metal Gear Solid. But Agrippa was the gladiator character. It was a lot more action-based, and the bits that you played in the gladiator arena were certainly much more enjoyable. And this is a very unique game that we will never, ever see again. There is no way Capcom is going to bring this back again. I mean, come on, we haven't seen it on the PlayStation 3. There is no way it's coming back on the PlayStation 4. We probably won't even see a PlayStation PSN release of it as well. So to me, it is a very unique title. I have actually owned this game for quite a while as well. I think it's been one of those just sort of sitting in the collection, just waiting for that opportunity to be played. And the only time, of course, where I would play it would be for a game club like this. But really, I think the biggest relief for Shadow of Rome was just completing that game and thinking, wow, I actually got through that game to its completion. And you obviously got to remember, guys, that both me, Fred, and Trees actually completed this within a month. Had we had a year to complete this, I think it just wouldn't have been the same experience. There was something about doing it in this time frame that just made it just more fun for a game club, I think. Definitely, would I recommend playing through Shadow of Rome? Well, I did write a review on Gaming History 101. I think if you've got a year, definitely. But if you've got to do this in a short amount of time, maybe not. But that is Shadow of Rome, probably definitely my most memorable game club of the year. So that was July. Let's move on to August, where me and Fred go back to an old favourite, and that is BioShock. I played this on the Xbox 360, and Fred played this on the PC, I believe, which most people would probably show off that the PC version is better, especially if you're part of the PC master race. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way. At this stage, I'm not much. I might be joining you on that bandwagon in the future. We'll see, and then maybe I can speak to it more. But I kept it simple, and I played it on the old Xbox 360, and I still think the game looks absolutely great on the Xbox 360. The last time I played this game, believe it or not, was in 2009, because that's the last save I had on the game until we revisit this game club. And going back to BioShock really did feel like visiting an old friend. And it was, I think you got a better appreciation for the game, because I felt like you knew what was going to happen, you knew the twists of the story, you knew where you're going to go, but you kind of took more notice of silly things like the environment and just the design of the game, and I was kind of looking at it with completely different eyes this time. Probably as well because I was planning to write a review for it as well, which I did for the Game Club. And dare I say, I enjoyed playing Bioshock more the second time than I did the first time, and I got a kind of a new respect for it. I think the first time I played Bioshock, which was all that time ago, well, probably been close to launch actually, probably in 2007. I was one of those people that was obviously comparing to System Shock 2, saying, "Oh well, it's good, but it doesn't have the depth of System Shock." But then when I went back to it now, I'm just thinking, you know what? That Bioshock, it does its own thing, and it's pretty damn awesome. And Bioshock is great, and it's still worth going back to today. It's held up incredibly well. Visually, gameplay-wise, this game is still great fun. How would I rank it compared to the other Bioshocks? I'd probably still say Bioshock is still my favourite. So that was August, and then this is where me and Fred decided to change things up. August was probably the last Game Club we did within just a month, which might have been thanks to Shadow of Rome. so we decided to move Game Clubs to every 2 months instead. So September and October was Project Zero a month, or Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. I actually played through both Project Zero 1 and 2. I played through the first game as well because I thought it would be a good idea to catch up on the backstory of the game, and plus I was generally interested in playing through both of these games because they're kind of survival horror games that I've kind of missed out on and I've heard a lot of good things about. And while I agree that both Project Zero 1 and 2 are really good games and very unique in what they do, I wasn't as impressed as I guess what I was expecting from the games. Project Zero 2 really wasn't as scary as I was expecting. I know Trees Lounge from Easy Mode Unlocked was really touting this game as a real kind of like terrifying experience and like one of those horror games that you would really remember, but I just didn't really get that same experience, although he did later also say that going back to it, it wasn't the same as he remembered, so maybe there is some nostalgia to playing through the second game. Maybe I had to be there when the game was launched. Of course, I did miss out on both these games when they came out. I was, however, very impressed by the first game, Project Zero. I reviewed both these games for the website, and I believe Fred gave his take. This is the first review that Fred gave his own take on the reviews as well, so we started doing kind of like joint ones. Project Zero was, I just like the simplicity of it. It did remind me a lot of the original Resident Evil, where it was just a simple setting, just a mansion, a very, very simple story. You were just literally going in there to rescue your brother. I love the idea of the camera, and I like the idea that the camera's there to take pictures of ghosts and obviously exorcise them. But the game is really, really tough, the first one. It's not very long either, but I remember it being incredibly challenging, and there were moments there where you're just kind of like tearing your hair out thinking, oh, this is so difficult, because the ghost life at times they're difficult to capture, it's difficult to kind of get their movements. And when you go on to Project Zero 2, they really simplified things again. It's one of those sequels that they did improve things in the right way and make things easier, but I just didn't enjoy the experience as much as the first game. I really didn't like the story in the second game that much. Well, really, it wasn't really a case where I didn't like it, I just didn't connect with it as much. But needless to say, I was very happy to play through both these games, and hopefully when I get a bit of free time after we get through this incredible backlog of games that both me and Fred play through, I'll eventually get to a Project Zero 3, although I actually have that as Fatal Frame 3 on my US PlayStation Network account. So let's get on to last but not least. So for November and December, both me and Fred played through Secret of Mana. Secret of Mana, this is a SNES game, of course. This is one that I was mentioning all the way back when we were talking about Super Metroid, and I played this on the Virtual Console on the Wii as well. And this, to me, was a great game just to round off the year. It's live, kind of like a real-time battle system. It's an RPG, so you can level up. And I don't usually have the time to play through games like this on a console. When I talk about games like this, I mean games that are long and you have to sort of sit down and spend a lot of time with. I do, however, play a lot of sort of game RPGs or JRPGs on portable devices like the PSP, the DS, because it's a little bit easier for me to work it around work and everything else, because I can just sort of flip them up, play a little bit, and then put it on standby mode. Whereas when you're playing these games on a console, it's a lot more challenging. So I was a little bit nervous going to a Secret of Mana, but the game really isn't as long as, say, Final Fantasy 6 or 3, depending on what your preference is for the SNES version, or other JRPGs. And JRPG, I do use that term very loosely for Secret of Mana, since with its kind of real-time battle system, it's not as kind of intensive as, and it's not got that kind of take turns system as well. You swipe the sword. Really what you got in this game is a kind of like a stamina meter where you're kind of hitting enemies, but you can immediately evade straight away trying to avoid hits, but you wait till your bar fills up to sort of do maximum damage on the enemies. I love the colour scheme of this game. It's a very beautiful looking game. I believe this is quite a late SNES title as well. But it was a game that was supposed to come out for the SNES CD as well. But so reading into this game, I found out quite a lot was cut, and it kind of does show when you play through the game's experience. There could be more to it. It does feel like something that's kind of been, even though it is a long game. I think this game probably took me 20 hours at least probably to finish. It does feel there is sort of elements that could have been built on more or finished. But the whole experience, it just feels like one of those great sort of RPGs. I will call it an RPG. It just has a bit of everything in it. You travel the world, you visit all sorts of different places, you meet bizarre characters. There's a moment where you meet Santa and you rescue him. I really like that moment. It's really charming. Interesting characters. The story wasn't as deep as a Final Fantasy game or other sort of RPGs, but it still had that kind of like quite cute factor. So it was interesting to read about it and find out that apparently it was supposed to have a darker tone to it. There is kind of dark elements in it, but it doesn't feel like they didn't go above and beyond. And just finishing this game, when you got to it, you just thought, that was a really, really good experience. And it felt like one of those games, and I think this is still true today, where not many people have not many people have completed this game to completion or even experienced it at all, much like when it was released. Many people just completely missed this game out, but I was very happy to finish this. I think it was a great note to end on for the year. So that is all the game clubs from this year, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. It's just basically a little bit of a brief summary of the games. Of course, both me and Fred go into a lot more detail about these games individually on the individual game club episodes. So be sure to go check those out. But what I'll do is I will leave you to it today, and I will be back with another episode very soon. You can check me out on Twitter with my handle at Jamalaeus. Of course, you can find Fred at SpidersVenom. And of course, if you want to find out more, head over to gaminghistory101.com. Otherwise, as Fred would say, peace out.